The day my HOA president told me she was going to take my pasture through eminent domain, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes stupidity shows up wearing such a serious face you need a second to process it. She stood there in a pink tracksuit on the other side of my old stone wall, talking about progress, appraisers, community improvement, like she was some kind of governor instead of the queen of a subdivision built on somebody else's farmland. I looked past her, out at the pasture where my wife Sarah and I had planned to grow old together, and all I could think was, "Lady, you just declared war on the wrong old man." Her name was Karen Petrov, president of the Whispering Pines HOA, and she had spent years acting like the world ended where her authority did. My farm sat next to her precious development, but it was never part of it. That mattered to me because it meant freedom. It mattered to Karen because it meant there was one thing she couldn't control. My wife and I bought that farm 12 years ago, after a lifetime of moving around for my military career. We wanted roots, real ones, an old house, old land, a place with silence in it. And when we bought it, we also did something else, something Karen never bothered to discover before she decided to attack me. We put the 50-acre pasture into a conservation easement through the state land trust. That meant the land could never be developed. Not for houses, not for shops, not for a clubhouse, not for a golf course. Forever, in perpetuity, as the paperwork said. Sarah loved that word. She passed away 2 years ago, and ever since then that pasture hadn't just been land. It had been memory, promise, peace. Karen didn't see any of that. She saw open space she wanted turned into part of a golf course expansion for Whispering Pines. She called it progress. I called it greed and pastel. A few days after she made her little speech at my stone wall, I got a thick packet from a big city law firm. Certified mail, heavy paper, expensive letterhead, all meant to scare me. Inside was an offer to buy my pasture for a laughable amount, along with a threat claiming the HOA intended to use eminent domain authority under some local ordinance. It was nonsense. A private HOA cannot just seize private land because its president gets tired of looking at horses. But I knew the point wasn't to be right. The point was to be exhausting. So I called Maria Flores, a property attorney and former military lawyer, and I called an old friend of mine named Marcus, who had a gift for digging up useful information on people who thought they were smarter than everybody else. Maria read the packet and said it was one of the stupidest legal theories she'd ever seen. Then she told me something more important. Karen probably knew she couldn't win cleanly. This was about pressure, harassment, legal bills, frivolous threats, county complaints, a strategy of making my life miserable until surrender started to feel easier than resistance. So I did the one thing Karen didn't expect. I got patient. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I documented everything. The complaints started almost immediately. Code enforcement came to inspect my horse shed because of an anonymous complaint. Then the health department came because somebody claimed my well and septic system were contaminating groundwater. Both checks went nowhere, but they cost me time and peace. That was Karen's method, death by paperwork. At the same time, Marcus called back with a twist that made the whole thing make sense. Karen's husband, Stan, owned a construction company that was in financial trouble, lost contracts, debts piling up, the kind of slow collapse people in big houses try to hide behind clean driveways. And somehow, that same struggling company was lined up to benefit from Whispering Pines' proposed golf course expansion. Suddenly, this wasn't just Karen being power drunk. This was money. My pasture was standing in the way of a very convenient rescue plan for her husband's business that made her more dangerous, but it also made her sloppy. Around then, I met Miguel Garcia, a homeowner in Whispering Pines. He was trying to help his disabled son up a temporary ramp when I stopped to talk. Turned out Karen had forced his family to tear down a proper wheelchair ramp because it used materials she didn't approve. Then she fined them for it. You learn a lot about a person by what they choose to be cruel about. Miguel and his wife came over to my place a few nights later. They told me about the fines, the threats, The humiliation at HOA meetings. I told them Karen was using HOA money to try to seize my land. That hit him hard. Because once you understand the dues you pay are funding somebody else's ego and greed, you stop calling it governance and start calling it what it is. Miguel began talking quietly to other neighbors. Turns out Karen had been terrorizing half the subdivision. One family got fined over the color of a basketball hoop. A widow got harassed over a memorial garden for her late husband. Another couple got blocked from installing solar panels because Karen didn't like the look of them. Same story every time. Petty control, dressed up as community standards. Then Karen made her next mistake. She filed an actual lawsuit. That was when Maria smiled for the first time. Once Karen dragged the thing into court, we could hit back properly. Maria filed to dismiss the HOA's ridiculous claim and countersued, not just the HOA, but Karen personally, her husband personally, and the board members who had rubber-stamped the whole scam. Abusive process, civil conspiracy, financial self-dealing. The kind of words that sound dry until people realize they can lose their own money, their own homes, their own protection. One board member panicked and called me, practically choking on fear. He claimed he didn't know what Karen was really doing. I asked him whether Karen had also explained that HOA insurance might not cover a conspiracy to enrich her husband. He got very quiet after that. Meanwhile, Karen's harassment got more childish. Golf balls showed up on my lawn. Somebody spray-painted sellout near my driveway. My trail camera caught her golf cart near my property late at night. Juvenile stuff, but useful. Every petty act became one more brick in the wall we were building around her. Inside Whispering Pines, Miguel organized a homeowners group. Karen responded the only way bullies know how, with a threat. Her lawyer sent Miguel a cease and desist letter accusing him of defamation for daring to ask questions. He sent that letter to the whole neighborhood with one simple message. This is what happens when you speak up. That cracked the silence wide open. Soon the local paper got involved. A reporter came out, looked over the documents, talked to Miguel, saw the pattern, and published a front-page story about an HOA trying to seize private land for a golf course while residents accused the board of bullying and corruption. Once that happened, Karen started losing control of the story. So she did what people like her always do when the room starts turning. She tried to stage a show of strength. She called an emergency community meeting at a hotel ballroom. Big room. Projector screen, rows of chairs, stickers for supporters, golf course renderings on display like she was unveiling a monument instead of scam. She wanted a public vote to ratify the plan and make herself look untouchable. I let her have her stage. I showed up with Maria, Miguel, and one quiet older woman nobody in that room recognized. Dr. Evelyn Albright, executive director of the State Land Trust. Karen gave her speech about progress, prestige, rising values, all the usual polished lies. Then her lawyer got up and used enough legal jargon to fog the room. After that, Karen called for the vote. Her supporters shouted yes. Opponents shouted no. She banged the gavel like she conquered Rome and declared the community had spoken. Then, smiling like she was being generous, she offered me a few minutes to make final remarks. That was the moment she lost. I walked up, thanked her, and said I'd like to introduce someone who could provide legal clarity her own attorney had somehow forgotten to mention. Then I called up Dr. Albright. You could feel the confusion move through that ballroom like cold air. Dr. Albright stepped to the microphone and explained, in the calmest voice imaginable, that my pasture had been placed into a conservation easement 12 years earlier. She explained what that meant in plain English. The land's development rights had been permanently extinguished, forever. No golf course, no construction, no expansion, nothing. Then she held up the certified copy. The room went dead silent. Karen's face drained white right in front of everybody. One board member looked sick. The other looked like he wanted to vanish into the carpet. Dr. Albright kept going. She explained that any attempt to disturb the land could trigger immediate legal action and severe penalties, including personal liability for the people who authorized it. That phrase hit the room like a hammer. Karen tried to call it fake, fraud, a trick, but even her own lawyer knew the game was over the second he looked at the document. Then Maria stepped in and delivered the finishing blow. She announced that in light of everything now on record, we were expanding our claims, seeking injunctive relief, pursuing damages, and demanding full financial disclosure tied to Karen, the HOA, and her husband's company. Then she turned to the homeowners in the room and told them exactly what they needed to hear. Their dues had been used to fund a personal vendetta and a crooked land grab. That was it. The whole place exploded. People started shouting. Karen's own supporters turned on her. Questions flew from every direction. The board members bailed. The room that had been staged for her victory turned into a public collapse. And Karen, the woman who had spent years acting like a tiny suburban empress, just sat there under the hotel lights looking like somebody had pulled the floor out from under her. After that, everything unraveled fast. The homeowners removed Karen and the board. The lawsuit against me got withdrawn. The HOA books got opened. The audit showed exactly what you'd expect. Personal expenses, misuse of dues, shady contracts, and emails tying Karen and her husband to the golf course plan in ways that looked a whole lot less like leadership and a whole lot more like fraud. Stan's company folded not long after that. Their big house went into foreclosure. The day the moving trucks came, I sat on my porch and watched in silence. Karen looked older, smaller, emptied out. No pink tracksuit, no swagger, no audience. She looked across the pasture one last time, and there was nothing in her face but the hollow look people get when they finally meet consequences. Then she got in the car and left. The settlement covered my legal fees and more. I gave most of it away, part to the land trust, part to help the families Karen had unfairly fined. Miguel's family built a proper ramp for their son. The new HOA board cut back the petty enforcement and started acting like neighbors instead of prison guards. A few weeks later, Miguel sat with me on my porch at sunset, whiskey in hand, looking out over the pasture Sarah loved. He said there was a point when he thought Karen would win, because she seemed to have so much power. I told him that wasn't power. It was theater. Real power is quieter than that. It doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to bluff. It doesn't need matching lawyers and glossy renderings. Real power is knowing your ground, knowing your principles, and standing on both long enough for the lie across from you to break itself. That's the hard lesson in all this, I think. A lot of people confuse control with strength. They think if they can scare enough people, shame enough people, bury enough people in paperwork, that makes them untouchable. But sooner or later they lean on something solid, the law, the truth, a promise somebody actually kept, and that's where they fall apart. So the pasture stayed exactly where it belonged. Open, quiet, untouched. Sarah's promise held. Karen's empire collapsed. And the woman who tried to bulldoze my peace ended up watching her own life loaded into moving trucks, while my horses kept grazing like none of her nonsense had ever mattered. Tell me this. When somebody abuses power for years, is losing everything enough, or do you think people like that deserve something harsher? And have you ever dealt with an HOA, a boss, or a neighbor who thought authority gave them the right to control your life?